Lit, lit, lit. Reels, glide, lit, lit, lit. Right? The revolution is lit, lit, lit.
Uhuru, comrades, and welcome to today's Omali Taught Me Sunday study, live with the leader of the African nation, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. At our new start time, to our loyal viewers, especially on the US West Coast, we appreciate you for sticking with us all this time. We wanted to make this program more accessible to our audience everywhere and felt the change in time was absolutely necessary to facilitate that. So thank you all for joining us at our new show time, 10 a.m. Eastern. For today's show, we will discuss colonialism inside the US and building the African People's Socialist Party with the chairman, as well as the Secretary General for the African Socialist International, Luwezi, Kinshasa. We'll start with an overview, review highlights from Chapter 6 of Chairman's Izwele Tui Africa, and take questions from you, our viewers. You can access the reading material in the Facebook and YouTube descriptions. But before we jump into it, I ask that you take this moment right now to like and share this video and tag someone to participate in today's lesson. Let's broaden the reach of this discussion. Comment shared in the chat section. Comment shared in the chat section for us to let us know that you shared it. And now I would like to turn it over to Secretary General Luwezi Kinshasa for our overview. Uhuru SG. There it goes. Uhuru SG.
Uhuru, Director Akiro, thank you so much for inviting me. Uhuru, everyone. Uhuru, Chairman Omali Yeshitela, the leader of African Revolution, and uhuru to all of you who are watching this program. Colonialism as the mode of production, 50 years of relentless struggle. This is a groundbreaking, not just program, but concept that is going to change everything we have been dealing with in our lives. Let's say 50 years, since we're talking about 50 years of relentless struggle. It's going to change everything, every way we are, every way we think is going to be impacted by this concept, colonialism as the mode of production. Next. Salute to our chairman, Omali Yeshitela, leader of the African nation, relentlessly struck 50 years, leader of the worldwide revolution that is we working to bring to the world. And chairman is critical, essential to this new emergence of a concept of revolution. And I'll call on everyone who is watching. You cannot watch it by yourself. You go invite others to join us. Next. U.S. defeat of the African Revolution of the 60s meant defeat of anti-colonial politics. That's why today you don't hear of the Malcolm X, you don't hear of all the great struggle that shook the United States imperialism to its foundation. And people have to remember, when we're talking revolution in the U.S., U.S. is another front of worldwide African revolution. This has really has to be understood by everybody, because there is always people saying, you hear that many times, people saying, come home to Africa. But the United States is the one, the United States government is the one who's responsible for the misery of all the oppressed people on the planet. And the headquarters of the United States imperialism is in the US, of course. And the African people live in the US. And they have been the cornerstone of development of the United States colonial capitalism. And the African Revolution is strategic, not just to African people, but to all people, all oppressed people on the planet. So the defeat of the African Revolution worldwide, but particularly in the United States, is critical. I want people to understand that. It has an implication for all of us. Next. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and the other anti-colonial leaders, the leaders of the Black Panther Party, like Fred Hampton, Bobby Hutton, and many more, were killed, were murdered by the United States government, and many more were put in prison, and African revolutionaries are still in the prison today, right now as we're talking. They are still in prisons. And you have many were chased into exile to France, Algeria, throughout the world. People went to China and so on. And people have really to understand that the revolution did not disappear by itself. The revolution just, it was destroyed, it was attacked. And that's what people need to understand. It was attacked by who? The United States government. That has to be understood by everybody. We did not just disappear. The United States government is responsible for that. Next. Of course, the Malcolm X, the Fred Hampton being murdered, the genuine leaders being murdered, and they have been replaced by people like Jesse Jackson. And Jesse Jackson is African, yes. He's black, yes. But he represents another class, the African petty bourgeoisie. Just like in Africa, the African petty bourgeoisie, not as an individual, but as a class, as a social group, went into power. They went to power. That's really has to be understood. We're not talking of one person being smart, doing well. No, we're talking of social class, a group, a collective. And Jesse Jackson is just one of the representatives of that social class. So you're talking of Andrew Young. He used to be the U.S. ambassador at the UN. Of course, the colony power and so on. So it's social class, not individuals. Next. Only the African People's Socialist Party kept the African Revolution alive. This is fundamental, comrades, really fundamental. For the simple reason that the African petty bourgeoisie, as we just said, went to power. But for the African working class, the next phase of the struggle is what? Is to deepen the struggle. And the chairman came with, as we're going to see throughout the slide, created the African People's Socialist Party. which meant that he was able to maintain the revolution, to keep the revolution alive. So the tasks of the African working class was to complete the revolution, but the African bourgeoisie task was now to be the managers of colonialism alongside with the white bourgeoisie. This really has to be understood. The new phase of struggle, for us is to continue and complete the revolution. Next. The party has made a struggle against colonialism for black power. This is a qualitative leap for African revolution. We don't just talk about fighting against colonialism, but we're talking of having power to transform our reality. Power. And we're talking about state power, military power, real power, so that we can determine and protect ourselves, but determine our own destiny. So black power has to be necessary if you're going to be successful in the struggle against colonialism. And this helps us to expose every opportunity, because we see people fighting against colonialism but don't recognize it. We need to go to power. So working class, the African working class needs to go to power. Next. The party, the African working class fight for liberation, self-government for Africa, African people everywhere. We have not seen anything like this. And the African working class inside the United States has been critical and is still critical for the direction of the African liberation worldwide. From the Garvey time to this present time, it's the African working class has been instrumental in developing the key concept we're dealing with today. From the RBG, things like that, the black flag, to the concept of self-government in the hands of the African working class. You won't see that anywhere else until you come to the African People's Socialist Party. And this is significant to the African working class inside the United States. So it's a significant front. It's a strategic front of the African liberation. If you are outside the United States, like in Africa, this has to be understood, that the United States, because of the African population that lives there, is a strategic front. Its size, its dynamics, its strength, its location, of course, is just fundamental. I really want everyone to understand that, particularly if you're an African outside the United States, and of course, Africans inside the United States also do need to understand that too. Next, please. In the 1960s, Chairman Omali joined the SNCC, Student Non-Violence Coordinating Committee. To be significant, he understood it. You have to be an organization. You have to be an organizer. You can't just be an individual. And as a young person at the time, he solved that contradiction by joining SNCC. Next, please. Chairman was jailed for taking down the oppressive St. Pete mural 1966 as an anti-colonial act of black power. That's profound, really profound, because the emergence of a demand for black power in the 60s, and the first act of black power was done by Chairman Omali Yeshitela. This historical, that is just profound. You know, it just shows basically the significance of our chairman, and also the trajectory has been from that time to today. It's fundamental. Next. 1968, Chairman Omali formed JOMO, the Junta of Militant Organizations, as an anti-colonial precursor of the party. And you go remember in the 60s, there were other organizations, and JOMO was one of those key organizations, particularly in the south of the United States. JOMO was the leading revolutionary anti-colonial struggle organization at the time, and this was the basically the basis that allowed our chairman basically to develop the skills, the necessary experience to go on later on to build the party we are all part of today. The chairman formed the African People's Socialist Party in 1972, a revolutionary anti-colonial cadre party. And this historical, not just talking about the U.S. front of African liberation, but is historical for all black people. In fact, for all colonized people, speaking, because for colonialism to be eradicated, for the African working class to go to power, for the United States government to be defeated, the African revolution has to be led by the advanced detachment, by the most advanced revolution organization. That's the question of the party. And this question has not been resolved. If you look at a black liberation movement across the planet, across the globe, you will see that everywhere you look at, this question has not been resolved. And Chairman has solved that question. He has built the party, the cadre party, to take the revolution on and to complete the black revolution. This is another historical benchmark, landmark, and history of building a revolution organization for African revolution and also for the all colonized people's revolution. Next. The chairman solved the problems of the African revolution so that this time around we will win. We just talked about building the party of the African working class to capture power, to be in government, the workers to be in the government. And that was a fundamental question. Of course, the other question, for example, I can take quickly, the question of the role of white people. That's another fundamental question. Nobody has solved that question. And Chairman has shown the way, and all of you can see we have what we call white solidarity with black power. That's a fundamental question, particularly inside the United States, inside the colonizing nations. And the question of philosophy, as you know, that's another question. So because of the contribution the chairman has made, we are where we are today. All of us are participating in this movement because of those leap he has done in resolving those key fundamental questions. Otherwise, the movement will not go forward. We'll be just turning in circle, even retreating, because you go solve the fundamental questions. Chairman developed African internationalism, the science of defining colonialism as the mode of production. When we're talking about fundamental question, there cannot be greater question than this one, because you have heard many times people, particularly Marxists, referring to modes of production, 5 modes of production, things like that. But the way society is organized, the way good society are produced, the relationship that are built in that society, colonialism is the starting point. Is the starting point for everything. This is profound. This is profound. It will free not only African people, it will free everybody. Any genuine force who want to see an end to colonial capitalism has to understand this. That colonialism is the mode of production. And today, I listen to news. It's incredible how it's being used by everybody across the planet. It's incredible. So I just want to, everyone should definitely embrace this. And it's great. This is a great contribution to the change we want to see in the world, where African people are the subject of a history and starting point of colonial mode of production. Look at this beautiful picture. Africans, the Kanka Musa, the emperor, the leader of Mali, as he was known at the time, basically showing African people being the subject of our own history, of our own reality. And all of a sudden, we came under colonial attacks that reduced us to the object of history, where the starting point of the production is colonialism, oppression of African people, colonizing African people everywhere, attacking Africa every day, stealing everything from us every day, so that a new relationship can be established between Africa and the oppressors. So we have just to remember that we were the subject of our history, and we're fighting to recover our place as makers of a history, and this can only be done by identifying colonialism as a mode of production, that it has to go, That's why we're here. Stolen African labor, resources were the startup capital of colonial capitalism, stock market. Just imagine a new system being put in place, and it starts from murder, stealing, killing, robbing, destroying lives. Just unbelievable, unbelievable the way capitalism, colonial capitalism was born. And we should not allow anybody to forget that when we're looking at capitalism, we're looking at a system born out of murder, genocide, pillaging, destroying everything that lives need, that we need in a life, in Africa, in America, everywhere. So it's a system that has no redeeming quality, not a single redeeming quality. And he has to go. And we just want to remind people that African people were the start-up capital. You can't be a capitalist without being a colonizer. That's impossible. So if you're a capitalist, you are a colonizer, because the start-up capital is stealing Africans, killing Africans, robbing from Africans, and things like that. Genocide and land theft were committed against indigenous people. Today, you listen to the president of the United States accusing Putin of committing genocide, when United States president, society, everything stand on a genocide of indigenous people. How can that be? The United States president can even speak to the world, use the term genocide. Of course, this is due to the defeat of the Black Revolution. When we get stronger, it won't be allowed to say things like that. Genocide is the starting point of the success of the United States, the existence of the United States, the existence of colonial capitalism. You can see, you can go to the US. When you're not from the US, you come like from Africa, you go to the US. For people who are listening, you can spend days and months, you don't see the indigenous people. Think about it. You come to Europe, you spend days and months and years, and you don't see a single white person. How would that be? And that's the reality of indigenous people in Americas. European peers of the majority of the world created the colonial mode of production. And this has to be understood by everybody, because the propaganda of the colonial bourgeoisie, they'll make you believe that is the smart white people somewhere created capitalism. You can wake up in the morning and become an entrepreneur, as they say. And even the word entrepreneur is a French word. The freedom for any white people in France, I suppose, to be able to get involved in colonialism, in capturing and selling and exploiting our black people. They call you entrepreneur. The freedom to entreprendre, that's what it is. So it's not like that. Colonialism is the starting point. Looting and killing and murdering and raping, everything disgusting. Brutality you can't even imagine. That's the starting point. Wiping out indigenous people in Americas, in Australia, all those places. So that's really just fundamentals. The starting point. That's what it is. Europe can't be Europe without colonialism as a mode of production. You will not have a new Europe. The word European and Europe didn't exist. The word white to refer to people in Europe didn't exist. They all have their origin in colonial mode of production. The party published colonialism pamphlets 1975 and redefined our struggle for power and defeated the opportunist anti-racism line. And these are huge, immense contribution Chairman has made here. The United States, we said earlier on, defeated the Black Revolution, and we say the role of the African working class just developed under leadership of the African People's Socialist Party and Chairman Omali Yeshitela. because we are not the African petty bourgeoisie who went to power to manage colonialism. No, we were created as the party to deepen the struggle, to complete the revolution, and to complete that, we wrote this. Chairman wrote these pamphlets that basically puts colonialism in the center of everything needs to be done. Every struggle that needs to be carried out has to be around colonialism. That was the main issue, not the feelings of white people, not the ideas in the head of white people, because racism is just a massive distraction, massive in Europe, in America, everywhere black people is. They have been told the problem is racism. So you're fighting against ideas in the head of white people, as opposed to fighting for power, as opposed to fighting for destruction of colonialism, like the Vietnamese have done, like the Chinese have done. And that's fundamental. So if you don't have this pamphlet, you should get yourself this pamphlet so you can be in tune with the real struggle. Is the struggle to end colonialism, and white people should be working on the leadership of the African working class of our party, basically to be progressive. Over 50 years, every party campaign has forwarded the anti-colonial struggle. Free the Sea Woods, great struggle. In the late 70s, carried out by the African People's Socialist Party, that basically took the struggle of the party outside the United States. They came even to Britain to win solidarity for that struggle. African National Prison Organization, the response of the party to the massive imprisonment of the African people inside the US. Prison being a tool to control, to discipline, to contain the African population. The African National Women's Organization, another tool to bring the African women back to political struggle and the leadership of African People's Socialist Party. And you can see what's happening with the development of our African National Women's Organization today. In PDAM, early 90s, another tool to bring black people back to political life under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. And carrying out, in PDAM has carried out massive campaigns, all kind of campaigns against police brutalities, against massive imprisonment of black people, against police containment, and so on. And the ASI, African Socialist International, another strategic, because all these things are strategic organization created by Chairman Omali Yeshitela, African Socialist International, a response in our time, basically, to the African question. How can you end the misery, the exploitation, basically the powerlessness of all black people on the planet? You go unite Africa, you go capture power as a people, as one people, and we have our own plan. African Socialist International, our plan to recapture our future as a people across the planet. In 1976, our party participated in bicentennial with our colonies demonstration in Philadelphia, led by the Puerto Rico Socialist Party. This is another landmark of our party in its glorious struggle to complete the Black Revolution. Here we united with another anti-colonial struggle. Remember, we're talking of the United States front. Africans are not the only colonized people. You have the Mexicans, you have also the Africans from Puerto Rico, mixed or not, but they many of them definitely they're aware of that. So that also another development to consolidate the anti-colonial front of the colonized people inside the United States. Where the chairman defines the U.S. government's attack on our movement as counterinsurgency, a war against colonized people to prevent a revolution. I never heard of anybody politically talking about a counterinsurgency anyway. It's a term you see all the time the bourgeoisie using. And it's only through African internationalism that we became aware that what was going on in our neighborhood is counterinsurgency, war without end, war without forms, war without terms. Anything is allowed to prevent black people from coming back to revolutionary life. Or our party showed that Garvey's struggle for African power, self-government, and anti-colonial liberation. These, for those of us who didn't know much about Garvey, As you know, Garvey was slandered. He's still slandered. It was difficult for us to understand exactly who Garvey was. He was chairman in the African People's Socialist Party that gave us the real understanding that who Garvey was. He was fighting for African power, African self-government, African anti-colonial liberation. That he was basically, that's what we call ourselves, the Marcus Garvey or the Garveyites of the 21st century. So it was really the chairman work that really introduced us to the real Marcus Garvey, so that we could see through the slander that he had suffered when he was alive and up to now. Where the understanding of colonial mode of production led to the building of the African People's Solidarity Committee, 1976. We talked about the question of white people, the mysterious, white people basically question, and it has been solved. Chairman has solved it. If you're white, you will have to fight under the leadership of African Revolution, which means under the leadership of African People's Socialist Party. You can't be independent. You can't be following your own agenda. No, only one agenda: struggle to complete the Black Revolution. It has to become your agenda too. And you can only do that under the leadership of the African working class. And you have to do the work to raise reparations, to return the stolen resources. That's profound. So because of that, we are armed everywhere. We can be in Kenya. We know what to say, what to do. We are in France. We know what to say, what to do. So it's just fundamental. African internationalism recognized that all white people sit on the pedestal of colonialism and all reparations. I'm sure you met somebody who said, well, I wasn't around during colonial slavery. No. Yes, you were not there, but you have inherited all the power, all the wealth, everything. You drink coffee. Coffee is produced by colonized people. You use everything in a white society. Everything, as the chairman often says, their aspiration, their dreams, everything's based on colonialism. So it's not something just happened yesterday or 10 years ago, 100 years ago. It's every day. White people owe reparation to African people for every day's aggression, looting, oppression of black people. So that has to be really understood. That's the only place is to join the solidarity movement for white people. The Burning Spear newspaper, the journal for our party to win the war of ideas since 1968. If you Google looking for revolutionary newspaper, you won't see them. If you see some, then they will be old time. Maybe the time of Lenin or time of Castro. You see old newspaper. You won't see today newspaper. In our time newspaper, you won't see that. If you see one, it's more likely to be the Burning Spear newspaper. This is profound. Not only is it the oldest newspaper, the only revolutionary newspaper today, the leading revolutionary newspaper, I should say, today. We created our tactics and strategy for liberation in 1978, which has guided all our work for 50 years. Anybody who reads that book, when you think that pamphlet, it was written in 1978, you will see it is a stroke of a genius. It is just an incredible pamphlet. If you haven't read that pamphlet yet, you should order it. And this basically tells you the vanguard character of the party, represented by the chairman Omali himself. So get a copy of this copy, comrade, if you don't have it. Our party has built a relationship with anti-colonial forces around the world. You will also recognize a genuine revolutionary, not only the ability to unite their own people, like in the case of chairman, to unite the African people. You won't see anybody fighting harder or has achieved more, being consistent more than chairman uniting African people. But likewise, you recognize a real genuine revolutionary leader by their commitment to free the whole oppressed people on the planet. Their love for freedom, their hatred of oppression, whatever it comes from, of of uh, of colonized people. And that's so you can see the chairman traveling to Northern Ireland, this occupied island by British colonialism, and that was a war zone. And chairman traveled there to win solidarity from the Irish comrades there. That's profound, particularly when you understand how Britain is. The opportunism of the British working class, British organizations, then you become much clearer. And also in the US, Africans, as I said, we are not the only colonized people. As you know, United States is a prison of nations, and the other nations who have been imprisoned in the United States is the Mexican prison population, whose land has been stolen. As you know, 5 states in the US have been stolen directly from the current Mexico. And here you see chairman with the leader of the Mexican Revolution inside the US colonial borders. That's Comrade Ernesto Bustillos of Union del Barrio. And we have built a relationship that has lasted for more than 20 years, I think. And of course, on the left that was Jimmy Brown, the chairman of the Irish Republican Socialist Party, who was murdered, by the way, by the British colonialism few months after the chairman went there. Just to tell you the significance of that leadership. So, the leadership of the party and the understanding of colonialism as the mode of production liberate our brains. When you understand that the starting point of everything you see around you, of our misery, and of course, of the wealth, of the everything that is inside the colonizers, our nation, into white society, when you begin to understand everything, every problems you have in our community, everything you have inside your marriage, everything is linked to colonialism as the mode of production. Then your brains definitely will be freed, because now you know what's going on and you know what to do, and nobody can tell you any BS, because you understand the starting point, the beginning, the genesis of everything, and that's where we are. That's what African People's Socialist Party, that's what chairman's leadership represent, has given us a really understanding for everything from the beginning to where we are. You can understand everything from the beginning to where we are. And of course, our tasks in completing the Black Revolution. That's where we are today. So that's significant. That's why I'll just take this moment to once again salute Chairman for this brilliant contribution, not just to African Revolution, but to the world's revolution, because this understanding on model production will free the brains of all oppressed people. For all people, all genuine people who want to see a new world, you have to understand colonialism as a model production, which means you have to understand African internationalism. You have to listen and follow the leadership of Chairman Omali Yeshitela.
Uhuru S.G. Luwezi, Secretary General S.G. Luwezi of the African Socialist International. Just really want to appreciate that encompassing overview. And I just really also want to join in saluting the leadership of Chairman Omali Yeshitela, who is the author of African Internationalism, who has, worked over 5 decades to develop this theory that would, become the blueprint to make a world revolution, the world revolution that you're talking about. And just want to, just say that when we understand colonialism as a mode of production, the starting point, as you stated, about this social system, we understand that it's irredeemable. There are no qualities of this social system worth, holding on to. And that makes clearer the responsibility, which is making the revolution. And revolution is the only thing that's going to be capable of transforming one system into and creating an entirely different system. So we know that based on this analysis, based on this groundbreaking understanding of how the world came to be, what it is today, understanding that basis helps to determine where we're going. As the chairman stated before, putting forward colonialism as the fundamental problem gave our struggle a two-way end. It gave us something tangible versus, dealing with and battling ideas and philosophical idealism, but gave us something tangible on the ground to struggle against. So just really want to salute this profound overview, the history, the absolute necessity of the intervention of the chairman and his leadership, the theory of African internationalism, and the building of the African People's Socialist Party. So I'm going to stop because first, before we bring up the leader of the African nation, I just want to make sure that as many people as possible are engaged in this discussion. And, I want to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to hear what the chairman is going to be laying out for us in this study. So I want to again emphasize this importance of everybody doing their part on this. If you're watching this live stream, to do your part and spread this discussion like wildfire and share it. If you're watching on Facebook, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you like the video and share, put it out, tag people to join in this discussion. So you have to be a part of this. There's no discussion happening like it in the world, none like it. And the reason why there's none like it is because only the African People's Socialist Party is, claiming to want to make a revolution and has been doing that over the last 50 years. So this is the only place you're going to find a discussion that's talking about making the African revolution, because the party assumed the responsibility for that task. So please share this video right now, bring people into this discussion, comment, share it in the chat section once you've done that, because you do not want to hoard this information from the rest of the people around the world. If you know you are being transformed as a consequence of this study, then you have the responsibility of transforming the lives of others by bringing them to this discussion, giving them African internationalism. So we have to build this audience and give the chairman the audience that he absolutely needs and deserves to reach after his relentless leadership over the last 50 years. So want to make sure that we, again, drive people as much as possible, and you guys can participate in making that happen. So without further ado, I want to go ahead and introduce the leader of the African nation and the worldwide African revolution, who will deepen our understanding of colonialism in the US and the building of the African People's Socialist Party. Uhuru, Chairman Omali Yeshitela.
Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman.
Thank you very much, comrades. And I want to just extend a special appreciation to you, Comrade Akile, Director Akile, for the incredible work you do as the department, head of the Department of Agitation and Propaganda of the African People's Socialist Party. And to Comrade Secretary General Luwezi Kinshasa of the African Socialist International, which is responsible for leading the various party formations throughout the world. As you know, we're going to be looking at the chapter 6 of Israel to Africa, which is the political report to the Third Congress of the African People's Socialist Party. I think it's proper, however, to look at the introduction that's not included in what you have been provided for this discussion on today. I think that's important because there's a tendency too often of people to wonder why we would be looking at something, for example, this political report from a 1990 Congress of the African People's Socialist Party. And during an era right now, for example, when the United States government has rallied and reunited the fracturing colonial powers of the world in this war that's being made against Russia, and has succeeded to some extent within the white power circles of defining this war against Russia as some kind of extraordinary heroic struggle of the poor Ukrainians who've been victimized by ruthless Russia that wants to dominate Ukraine and the world. And the fact of the matter, of course, is something quite different. And there's never been an era in its existence that the United States government has not been involved in making war. And even before it consolidated itself as the United States government, what brought it together, what pulled it together, what gave it a foundation in terms of geography, landmass, resources, etc., was war that was being made against colonized people. In the first place, it was a war that was being made against Africa that started some time ago and is responsible, continues to be responsible for the kidnapping, capture of African people, our dispersal throughout the world, and the fact that we have been brought to this space now through the same kind of brigandage that robbed the indigenous peoples here of their land, their resources, stuck them in concentration camps that's called Indian reservations, where their lifespan in many instances does not extend beyond the 1950s. So there shouldn't be any question for anybody in the world about which side one should be on when it looks at this murderous assault that's being made against Russia, an attempt to destroy Russia. There shouldn't be any question of whether the United States even has the ability to fight a just war. It has never engaged in a just war. It came into existence as a consequence of unjust wars waged against African people, waged against indigenous peoples here, which would include the people of Mexico, from whom at least half of the territory was stolen. So I just wanted to, and as I say the people of Mexico, I say the indigenous peoples, generally speaking, in the United States. You think about the so-called Louisiana Purchase that was forced upon France by the success of the Haitian Revolution in 1804, how France was able to sell the United States more than half the territory that it now has as a consequence of the so-called Louisiana Purchase, named Louisiana for a king in France. And of course, when we say they sold Louisiana, we're talking about they sold all the indigenous peoples in this territory to the United States as well, because it didn't belong to France. It was stolen. And this is the whole colonial mode of production that we're talking about, the foundation of everything. And so we go back now to a political report that was provided to our Congress in 1990, the third Congress of the African People's Socialist Party. And we're doing this because history, the present isn't something that's sprung from the brow of some smart person or some clever white person like Zeus. The present is a consequence of, it rides on the shoulders of the past. And the fact is that since its inception, the African People's Socialist Party has been determined to end the oppression, to end the suffering, to end the humiliation and domination of African people by white power, by white people, by the colonizer. And so I'm going to read to you quickly the introduction to the political report, Izwe Letu e Africa, that was again presented to our third Congress in 1990. I'm going to read briefly the introduction to this before going into the actual chapter 6 of this document. And the introduction reads thus: Izwe Letu e Africa is the political report presented to the third Congress of the African People's Socialist Party, held in St. Petersburg, Florida, on September 1st through 8th, 1990. The title is an appropriation of the slogan of the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, Africa is our land. The Congress slogan Izwe Letu Africa and its characterization of this era as the era of the worldwide African revolution and socialist unification of Africa and African people under the leadership of the African working class and poor peasants, reveal the critical relationship the struggle of Africa has to the genuine liberation of African people worldwide, and for the final defeat of US imperialist-led capitalist world economy. While the Congress is an inter-party organization, it has already had a wide impact on our movement since the party's first Congress held in Oakland, California in 1981. For one thing, our party Congress represents several new developments within the US front of the African revolutionary movement. The counterinsurgent terror which had defeated the Black Revolution of the 60s had shifted sufficiently that it was possible to hold a Congress. Secondly, the Congress was evidence that the African working class, whose organization and leaders bore the brunt of the counterinsurgent terror, had required a new strength and was gearing up to complete the Black Revolution of the 60s. Thirdly, the advent of the Congress challenged the spontaneity of a rudderless African liberation movement that made policy as it went along and changed policies as a matter of convenience. The significance of the party's well-publicized within the context of our movement, the significance of the party's first Congress and the accompanying documents was such that the refusal of all African People Revolutionary Party to hold a campaign-based party of the African intelligentsia to hold a Congress resulted in a split in that formation. Let me say that again. Thirdly, the advent of the Congress challenged the spontaneity of a rudderless African liberation movement that made policy as it went along and changed policies as a matter of convenience. The significance of the party is well publicized within the context of our movement First Congress, and the accompanying documents was such that the refusal of the All African People's Revolutionary Party to hold a Congress resulted in a split in that formation. So although the Congress is the highest organization of our party, it has added a new feature, a higher level of political development and maturity for our entire movement. The first Congress held in Oakland in 1981 produced a two-part political report, main resolution under the titles Bread, Peace, and Black Power, and A New Beginning, The Road to Black Freedom and Socialism. While that Congress adopted our current constitution, consolidating the party as a national organization in quotes, and establishing the regular election of officers, among other things, the main task of the political report of that Congress was the defense of the US front of the African liberation movement. This defense was theoretical and political. On a theoretical level, the African liberation movement had to be defended from a parasitic white nationalist left, which is essentially a brand of the European left, which since the defeat of the Black Revolution of the 1960s has piled upon the back of our movement crypto neo-imperialist theories, which refuse to recognize our struggle for national liberation and our organized revolutionary connection with Africa. We characterize the parasitic white nationalist leftists as ideological imperialists and Ku Klux communists, and wage relentless ideological and political struggle with them that has benefited our entire movement as well as enhanced the ideological development of our party. On a political level, these white nationalist left formations also had to be fought sometimes as fiercely as the actual US government itself. This was particularly true around the Jesse Jackson presidential campaign that was raised by the left as the only legitimate process through which African people should engage in political life. The second Congress was held in St. Petersburg, Florida in 1987. The task of the political report to the second Congress was to report on party work and activity that had occurred since the first Congress. The political report also noted the political impact of the arrival of the African working class through the party on the US-based African anti-colonial movement. That political report revealed the success of the party's struggle against opportunism and was represented by the strategic relationship between liberal imperialism and US domestic colonialism. Entitled This Time Till It's Won, Power in Our Own Hands, the political report exposed how the defeat of the Black Revolution of the 1960s allowed the African petty bourgeoisie to rise in influence. The second political report established the primary task of the party to be building and consolidating the African People's Socialist Party, which is the primary instrument of the African working class for the overthrow of bourgeois white power, the conquest of Black political power, and the elevation of the colonized African working class to the position of ruling class. The political report of our third Congress presented here has as its basic task the consolidation of the party historically, theoretically, politically, and organizationally. This political report contains a summation of the Black Revolution of the 60s, without which no revolutionary organization within the US can move correctly today. The magnificent fighting history of our party is also summed up, tracing our relationship to the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, in the early 60s, to the junta of militant organizations, JOMO, in 1968, to the May 1972 founding of the party through the fusion of 3 Florida-based organizations. The political report also sums up the current epoch of struggles we are confronted with, challenging the popular mischaracterization that this is an epoch of failure or crisis of socialism. Because we have always understood that the essential class struggle in the world does not exist between the white workers and the white ruling class, but is actually concentrated in the struggle against colonialism and economic dependency. We understand that the current crisis is in fact a crisis of capitalism, not a crisis of socialism. Following the summation of the epoch, the political report explains the general impact of our party on the US front of the African liberation movement, and then the theoretical impact of our party on this movement. Finally, the political report lays out what is to be done, reestablishing the main task of building and consolidating the party. The party's theory, especially regarding the real origin of capitalism, the elaboration of the theory of primitive accumulation of capital, has either solved or pointed the way towards solution of the fundamental theoretical questions necessary for revolution. Because of this, the question of party building is no longer a theoretical question, but an organizational one. Since the party has solved those theoretical questions, which have been left unresolved by Garvey and Nkrumah, through the political report, we are able to establish the central focus of our revolutionary work as building the African Socialist International. It is from the understanding of the centrality of our relation, I'm sorry here. Anyway, we'll move from there. It is from the understanding of the centrality of our relationship to Africa and the critical significance of the leadership of the African working class in alliance with the poor peasant that the title of this political report flows as it states, quote, "We must take the question of Africa, its relationship to the structure of capitalist world economy, and our relationship to it, to every African community in the world. This is important for 1,000 reasons, but Africa is suffering with no obvious relief in sight." So today, as many of the predictions made by the party's theoretical analysis over the past 12 years when this was written have come to pass, the analysis and direction provided by Israelite Africa provide greater theoretical clarity and strategic direction for the International African Liberation Movement. So this was like the introduction to the political report that we will be looking at right now in the form of chapter 6. And if I can go there, thusly. So chapter 6, the impact of theory of African internationalism. We start with this quote: "All our work is guided by our understanding that our struggle for national liberation within US borders is an integral part of the whole African liberation movement. That the African liberation movement itself is part of the great contest between the ever-emerging forces of international socialism and the dead but not yet dead forces of imperialism. That the particular character of the African liberation movement within the US is a struggle against domestic colonialism. That the destruction of colonialism led by a conscious Black revolutionary socialist party will constitute the critical blow in the struggle for socialism within US borders." These words constitute the basic line of our party. They're more than just a statement or a group of words, however. These words represent the theoretical development of our party, a theoretical development that has informed the practice of our party and provided essential leadership for our entire anti-colonial movement in the process of overcoming the defeat of the Black Revolution of the 60s and advancing the revolutionary process. This is important because our revolution of the 60s was defeated before it had really deepened its theoretical works, notwithstanding its impact in this regard on white nationalist bourgeois theory. Moreover, our revolution was defeated before ideological contradictions within the broad anti-colonialist tendency were resolved. In fact, the primary ideological struggles given rise to the leadership of the revolutionary anti-colonialist tendency were the struggles against US imperialist white power and the integrationists, the liberal African primitive petty bourgeoisie that acted as imperialism's agents within the Black liberation movement. The military defeat of the Black Revolution of the 60s resulted in a victory for the liberal sector of the white ruling class, with the subsequent imposition of neo-colonialism that empowered an opportunist trader sector of the African primitive petty bourgeoisie as indirect rulers of our communities throughout the United States. Actually, this happened throughout the world. And we say the liberal bourgeoisie because the colonialists never is not represented by some homogeneous entity. It has different interests, the bourgeoisie does. And these interests are reflected, these are material interests, these are economic interests. And these interests are reflected philosophically, ideologically. And we see them sometimes in different forces like the Democratic and Republican parties in the United States. And we think that sometimes people think that they're looking at different groups, but they're looking at the same group with different ideas about how to maintain colonial domination. The same thing is true overall. And what has happened, of course, is that a sector of the bourgeoisie that felt the need to completely directly control and dominate African people, that was the bourgeoisie in general for a long period of time. And then there were, because of the resistance of African people and other peoples to colonial domination, there emerged a real science of controlling human beings that was called counterinsurgency. That's been at work for a long time, but as it relates to Africa, there was a man, Frederick Lugard from England, who developed this concept of indirect rule. So where white power doesn't represent itself harshly in its own form, that white power colonial domination can also be implemented and consolidated and utilized by using white power in blackface. Black people carry out the mission. So when you see the defeat of a sector of colonialism, and then you see the emergence, when you see the oppression of our people by a sector of the bourgeoisie using brute force, which is generally how it's worked. And then you see the emergence of another sector that utilizes what we refer to as neo-colonialism or indirect rule. This is the liberal bourgeoisie. This is the liberal bourgeoisie that is expressing itself. So I just wanted to say that it's really important to understand that because our revolution of the 60s was defeated before it had really deepened its theoretical works, notwithstanding its impact and disregard on white nationalist bourgeois theory. Moreover, our revolution was defeated before ideological contradictions within the broad anti-colonial tendencies were resolved. In fact, the primary ideological struggles given rise to the leadership of the revolutionary anti-colonialist tendencies were the struggles against US imperialist white power and integrationists, the liberal African primitive petty bourgeoisie that acted as imperialism agents within the Black liberation movement. The military defeat of the Black Revolution of the 60s resulted in a victory for the liberal sector of the white ruling class, the victory for the neo-colonials, for that sector that would raise up the neo-colonials, colonizers, white power and blackface. The military defeat of the Black Revolution of the 60s resulted in a victory for the liberal sector of the white ruling class, with the subsequent imposition of neo-colonialism that empowered an opportunist, traitor sector of the African primitive petty bourgeoisie as indirect rulers of our communities throughout the United States. So this is as opposed to the white man standing directly, controlling us with the gun in the whip, immediately, directly. Then what we see now is the ascendancy of another sector of the colonizers. This is not an anti-colonialist force. This is another sector of the colonized that now expresses its rule and maintains its rule through neo-colonialism. This is the liberal sector of the bourgeoisie. But the revolutionary anti-colonial sector of our movement was neither theoretically nor ideologically homogeneous. Although its unity in opposition to white power and integrationism or servile assimilationism kept us from being others. The following excerpts from a December 1981 issue of the Brainsphere represent an example of the party's effort to deal with the continuing contradiction within the anti-colonial movement and to settle all ideological accounts. This article was in reference to a pending self-determination conference hosted by the short-lived National Black Human Rights Coalition, a new Africanist formation that was founded in part to contend with the influence of our party and our mass organization, the African National Prison Organization, or ANPO. The fact that Black people, and this is the quote, the fact that Black people as a people are colonized by US imperialism establishes the basis for cross-class alliances within the domestic African colony. This is because nearly the whole people have a contradiction with imperialism, including most of the Black petty bourgeoisie, which aspires to become the new ruling class. This fact means that the question of national liberation has different meaning for the Black petty bourgeoisie than for the majority of the Black population who are poor, oppressed workers. And I'm saying another reason that this is significant and we should be looking at this political report to a 1990 Congress is because we see various iterations of the same kind of political forces existing today, both in the so-called white left and colonizers and within the struggle of our community, our people itself. I shall continue. The national liberation of the aspiring Black petty bourgeoisie is a liberation from the limitations of its development into a full-blown bourgeoisie, which are imposed on it by domestic colonialism, the imperialist rule by foreign gangsters. Within this concept of national liberation is the germ of the future continuing exploitation of the African working class by Black bourgeoisie, which has been liberated from the national oppression which prevented the emergence of a free, independent Black boss. Such a national liberation is not in the interest of the colonized African working class. The national liberation of the working class is a liberation which will sweep away all forms of oppression and exploitation. The national liberation of the domestically colonized African working class is not only interested in removing the oppression of foreign rule, it is also interested in destroying the class rule which exploits the workers and toiling masses of all countries where the capitalist system prevails. The national liberation of the working class is explicitly anti-capitalist and consciously part of the worldwide socialist movement. From this, it is clear that although our struggle for national liberation will take advantage of short-term alliances for the assault on foreign domination, on domestic colonialism, it should be equally clear that the long-term interests of the African working class and the Black petty bourgeois nationalists are diametrically opposed. And in the long run, the African working class must emerge from the struggle against national oppression as the dominant social force, as a burning spear which will light the road to socialism. The Black petty bourgeoisie within current US borders finds itself in a peculiar situation. It is a petty bourgeoisie which is part of a domestic colony. That is to say, the people are not colonized on the land of their heritage by foreign oppressors. Therefore, the question of liberation has caused a tremendous confusion. Unlike the petty bourgeoisie on the continent of Africa, it cannot realize its avaricious aim to become the capitalist ruling class by simply chasing foreign oppressors off indigenous land. One sector of the Black petty bourgeoisie has capitulated to one or another sector of the US white ruling class, which pays it off in the forms of economic and political privilege, state-supported jobs, prestige, and administrative rights of the colonialist social program designed to pacify the Black working class. Like, these are the people who connected to a sector of the bourgeoisie. When it comes to power, they fight like hell for welfare rights. They fight like hell for various kind of anti-poverty programs. And they are not fighting for the masses of the workers who don't need welfare and who don't need anti-poverty program. The people who need the end of this relationship we have with white power, they are fighting because they will be the administrators working for white power over the welfare programs. Those are the ones in our community. Those are the social workers that we run into in our communities and welfare areas and all these other social programs that, and sometimes they are funded by corporations. So, however, there is another sector of the Black petty bourgeoisie, which, because of the inability or unwillingness of the white ruling class to pay it off with privilege, loot, and prestige, or because of its ability to see that the white ruling class has a tenuous future, or both, takes a more militant and anti-imperialist posture, and is capable of demonstrating political independence from this system, which does not allow it to realize its bourgeois ambitions. For this last sector of the Black petty bourgeoisie, the question of land is supremely important as a base upon which to launch the development of a Black bourgeois state. It is a landless social formation which cannot realize its aspiration to become the bourgeoisie without land. In this sense, it is similar to the landless Jewish bourgeoisie, who was prevented by anti-Semitism from becoming integrated into the national bourgeoisie in Europe and consequently launched a reactionary nationalistic Zionist movement, which resulted in a partnership with imperialism, the theft of Palestinian land, and establishment of the illegitimate state of Israel. Because of the contradictions inherent in this landlessness, this sector of the Black petty bourgeoisie has been forced to contrive a variety of metaphysical bourgeois premises upon which to base its claim to land. One faction of this sector has pushed forth a notion that liquidates the history of our struggle by creating an imaginary historical process which forged African people into a new nation since our enslaved arrival in the United States. It is from this faction that we see variations of the Black Belt South theory being pushed based on the premise that Africans within the United States are no longer Africans, but now part of the Negro nation, the Afro-American nation, or the new African nation, etc. Another faction of what we might call the radical patriotic sector of the Black petty bourgeois nationalists, while recognizing the historical basis for our African nationality, has, unlike the Black Belt South advocates which deny the past, denied the present by liquidating the specificity of our struggle for liberation wherever we are located. This faction simply recognizes Africa as the solution without accurately and definitively posing the question. The significant thing about both factions composing this tendency is that notwithstanding their militant rhetoric, both leave imperialism, that is to say, the international system of class rule responsible for present-day African oppression and colonization off the hook. Neither of these tendencies presupposes an assault on US imperialism, which would destroy the national oppression of African people, as well as the class exploitation of workers, despite the fact that from 90 to 94% of the African population within the US are workers. It is the party's understanding that philosophical and line positions represent a class outlook, which makes it imperative for the party to participate in this event in order to represent the views of the African working class, which has an interest in the end of national oppression, but which is also the only class formation within the domestically colonized population with an absolute interest in the destruction of class rule and the struggle for socialism. While our broad anti-colonial movement was able to experience general unity in opposition to colonialism or foreign domination, it had not yet resolved the question of what kind of social system we were fighting for, to achieve for our people, or what social force was key to achieving that social system. After the defeat of our revolution, the theoretical work developed by the African People's Socialist Party played a major role in rebuilding the general anti-colonial tendency. For almost 20 years, the Burning Spear, the oldest revolutionary African journal in the United States and the only surviving anti-colonial newspaper from the Black Revolution of the 60s, defended the anti-colonial tendency, shared the practical political experiences of our party, and kept African militants abreast of every theoretical advance we made. One such theoretical advance dealt with the question of colonialism itself. While various forces within our movement had defined ours as a struggle against colonialism, our party had done much to deepen our understanding of the theoretical basis of the colonial definition. For example, here's an excerpt from a February 1978 presentation I made in San Francisco, California, to a North American sponsored political event at one of the party's first California political activities. It is the presentation from which the basic party line quoted above was taken, and it was printed in full in the Burning Spear. And here's the quote: "The African People's Socialist Party was not the first to disclose the colonial contradiction confronting Africans within current US borders. Malcolm X was one of the first leaders of the Black pro-independence movement to articulate our major contradiction with US imperialism as colonialism. He said, America is a colonial power. She has colonized 22 million Afro-Americans by depriving us of first-class citizenship, by depriving us of civil rights, actually by depriving us of human rights." Malcolm also stated quite emphatically in that same speech in New York on April 8, 1994, there are 22 million African Americans who are ready to fight for independence right here. Stokely Carmichael, now known as Kwame Ture when this was written, and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which were leading forces in the mid-1960s, also put forth an anti-colonial position, as did the Black Panther Party during the height of its political influence in this country. Albert Mamie, author of The Colonizer and the Colonized, first published in 1957, also dedicated the American addition to the American Negro, also colonized. So we see that the colonial question was being pushed, it was being discussed at this time. So, but however, what our party did discover that made for a qualitative leap in understanding how to move toward liberation is that in the US, colonialism represents the relationship of class to race. Prior to this discovery, our party was one with most of the pro-independence movement in describing ours as a struggle against racism. At the same time, we were also calling it a struggle against colonialism. That is to say, our movement is still under the ideological influence of the primitive petty bourgeois civil rightists whose colonialist mentality often equated freedom with their proximity to white people, incorrectly used the term racism and colonialism to define the same set of circumstances and oppressive structures responsible for our condition. However, at the moment, we were able to understand that what we had been describing as institutional racism was the same thing we meant by the term colonialism, and that these same set of circumstances and oppressive structures imposed on our people were also defined as colonialism historically throughout the world. Our ideological and political development increased 1,000-fold. This understanding of colonialism helped us to place the responsibility for our oppression squarely upon the shoulders of the North American ruling class. So this is really important. I'm going to just read just a little more here, because I think it's important also to explain some things that are existing right now in the world, struggles that we are currently involved in, some which are more obvious than others. And they include struggles within what is characterized as the Black liberation movement, and struggles that the Black liberation movement is involved in, not only against imperialist white power, but by some of its minions that call itself white left or something to that extent. And so our party was able to discover that our main or primary struggle is against colonialism, which is an imperialist form, therefore necessarily having class connotations, and which utilizes the ideology of racism to justify and obscure the fundamental relationship that African people within the US have with the capitalist colonialist ruling class state. We discovered that colonialism is the condition we suffer from as a people, and that racism is the ideology that justifies or obscures that relationship. Colonialism is real and concrete. It is a human-made condition that can be struggled against. And this is really important because, there are white leftists who love for us to talk about racism because it keeps white people and them in the center in a certain way. It talks about the significance of being with white people, having white people to like us and love us. And it keeps us off task. It prevents us from joining in struggle like the Vietnamese that were mentioned early in the overview to this, or the Chinese and other people who understood that they had to fight against colonialist white power. You didn't see the Vietnamese involved in struggle to make the white people like them, to make the Americans like them. They understood that they had to overthrow first the rule of the role of the French colonizers. Then they had to overthrow and they crushed the French in Dien Bien Phu in 1954. A fantastic military confrontation. And then they had to crush the United States. And you saw, many of you saw that, if not saw videos of it even recently where the United States had to flee Vietnam because the people fought for control for their own power, to kick the United States out, to destroy the United States created entity, this neo-colonial government the United States was using to control the people of Vietnam. Just think what would have happened if instead the Vietnamese people would have just been fighting to get the white people, get the French to like them, to get the Americans to like them. There were sectors of Vietnamese people who did do that. There were sectors of the Vietnamese people who were loyal to France, who were loyal to the United States, and who lived a good life as a consequence of that. But the revolutionaries, the people who understood that the struggle was against colonialism and not making white people like them, not making the colonizers like them, they fought and they won, just as we will fight and we will win as we come to understand this. So we say that on the other hand, we discover that racism is the ideas in the heads of North Americans. Racism is the ideas displayed by North Americans, which make you whites dupes, allies, and collaborators with your ruling class in its attack on us, which reinforce and maintain our colonial relationship to the US North American state. When Black people struggle against racism as the main or primary contradiction, we are struggling against ideas which are in the heads of the vast majority of Europeans and US North American people. There is no identifiable source of political power to overcome. And the enemy must necessarily be viewed as a politically homogeneous and monolithic group of people who are racially defined and have no exploitable political differences, and who, because they are defined racially, represent a permanent condition which can never be overcome short of their extermination. That is not to say that the anti-Black ideas in the heads of North Americans cannot harm us. History will not tolerate such a claim. But the way in which they harm us is that they serve to maintain our colonial relationship with the US North American capitalist colonial state. Therefore, it should be clear that what we generally refer to as racism is simply individual North Americans carrying out the US policy of colonialism. Our understanding of colonialism as a relationship of class to race within the US has revealed to us inherent reformist character of a struggle of Black people against racism. For ultimately, the struggle against racism, when it is given material form, boils down to a struggle for equality with the exploited North American working class. That is to say, equality within capitalism. This kind of struggle not only places severe restrictions on the forward movement of our struggle for political independence, but it also puts a brake on the development of the entire US-based North American struggle for socialism. A struggle by Black people against racism or for integration is a struggle for admittance into the present system, and therefore leaves the system generally unattacked, as it must necessarily presuppose the system to be worthy of our desire for admittance. Such a struggle is actually a vindication, and therefore an inadvertent perpetrator of the system, while a successful struggle against colonialism will mean the certain death of the system. And your right left friends know this, which is why even if we look at we can go back to struggles that the party was involved in the 1980s, particularly dealing with white left forces. You're looking at one of the bases for the creation in 1976 of the African People's Solidarity Committee because of white intervention, because white people love it when what we about is making white people love us or white people like us, when we're just struggling against racism, because that again puts them in the center. It is a form of narcissism on their part to promote the whole struggle to make me like you, struggle to make me love you. And we run into this all the time. And when you see the African Revolution revealing itself in fact, and saying that we are struggling for independence, for freedom, then we get defined as separatists. They say these are Black separatists. But they didn't say when the white people were stealing this land from the indigenous people. Well, in 1776, they put forth something that they call a Declaration of Independence, not a declaration of separation. And what we are saying is that we want separation. This is not some personal thing that white people can get uptight about Black people not wanting to be with them. Hell, who would want to be with the colonizer? Who would want to be with you when all you do is oppress and kill us on a regular basis and make excuses for it, and then put yourself forward in the world as this great and kind force that's not murdering people all over in Russia and Ukraine? That's not murdering. You are the victims all the time. In fact, anytime something happens, people have to always prove ourselves as innocent. We didn't do it. When the history of the relationship is that you are guilty, always have been guilty, and then for me to have to fight to get you to forgive me, to get you to like me, is just nonsensical, and you know it's nonsensical. And so we are saying that's not the way it is. That's not the way it's ever going to be anymore, as long as the African People's Socialist Party can maintain the leadership of this revolutionary movement that we're engaged in. We're fighting to be free. And we see all kinds of forces who build themselves, who have events on a regular basis, not for the liberation of African people, but who use Black people, who use other peoples as performers at their events, these live events. They do webinars, etc., to promote themselves and to show that they're wonderful. They have one or two Africans there who are not fighting for complete liberation, who are not fighting for overthrowing this relationship but who has some iteration of white people's colonizers politic that can justify, that you can use to justify your own relevance. This is what we see all the time. We see it right now in St. Louis today, where we are doing incredible kind of work, white left who claim to be for Black people, but do everything they can to make sure that what is represented in the world for Black people is not a struggle to overturn the colonial relationship that we have with white power, but a struggle to make sure that they have a forum that is validated, that a white nationalist, white left colonial forum that is validated by the participation of African people on that forum. It is not a forum to overturn colonialism. It is not a forum to really get rid of the contradiction that they're talking about. It is a forum to validate themselves, and they validate themselves by having me to be on the platform with them. No more days like that. Can't work like that. So we'll talk more about that. We're going to be talking about more about that within the next several days. So we're saying a struggle by Black people against racism or for integration is a struggle for admittance into the present system, and therefore leaves the system generally unattacked. As it must necessarily presuppose the system to be worthy of our desire for admittance. Such a struggle is actually a vindication and therefore an inadvertent perpetrator of the system. While a successful struggle against colonialism will mean the certain death of this system. Listen, for white leftists who are truly opposed to this system the way they say they are, that means they would get under the leadership of the colonized people upon whom this system relies for its very existence. And they would fight under that leadership, and they would fight for the destruction of colonialism, but they don't. They have every other kinds of issue for white rights that they would fight for. They will fight against us around climate change. Hell, the climate change started with the attack by white power, by the colonizers on Black people, on brown people around the world. This is where the climate contradiction began. Colonialism is the climate contradiction, but they won't fight against colonialism. They will fight for white rights. They will fight to save the planet for white people, for the colonizer. If you really want to get rid of the climate contradiction, you unite with the Black Revolution to overturn the whole system. That will be the victory. But they don't want the system overturned. If it means happening at the expense of their being able to hold on to their America, hold on to their illusions of how wonderful they are and how wonderful America and the social system, that's what they want. And they're not going to have that. That's what this meeting is about. That's why it's so important for us to look at even what we were talking about in 1990. So in the African People's Socialist Party, we were able to discover that while the vast majority of Black people within the US have to work for a living, and we're saying this because, let me just say this. I'm going to go to the paragraph, to the preceding paragraph. Say inevitably, a struggle for equality acts as an apologist for capitalist exploitation. It presupposes a great US, except for the inequality between Africans, other subject nationalities and peoples, and the US North American working class. It is a left-handed liquidation of the oppression of women, of homosexuals, of the criminal theft of surplus value. It makes the social and economic system within current US borders appear legitimate. Else, why would Africans be struggling for equality within it? Such a struggle obscures the fundamental contradiction confronting African people within the US, which is colonialism, as well as the basic antagonisms inherent in capitalism. In the African People's Socialist Party, we were able to discover that while the vast majority of Black people within the US have to work for a living and are exploited at the point of production, such exploitation does not constitute the primary contradiction for African people within the US. The primary contradiction for Black people within the US does not have to do with our present relationship to the means of production. The primary contradiction for Black people within the US is between us as a whole people and the US North American state. It is the North American capitalist colonial state that maintains and enforces the colonial domination of our people. It is an arm of the US imperialist state that has persons in this country, prisons in this country bursting at the seams with African people. It is the state that attacked Bessie Woods and has her locked up for defending herself from a rape attack and historical colonialist terrorist tactic by a North American man. But while we say that the main or primary or fundamental contradiction confronting African people within the US does not occur at the point of production or is not between our relationship to the existing means of production, we do not mean that we do not face a contradiction at the point of production at all. The fact that the majority of Black people work for a living and that we have a fundamental antagonistic contradiction with the US capitalist colonialist state discloses the objective basis for unity between the struggle for national liberation and socialism. A successful struggle by the US North American working people will also demand the destruction of the US North American ruling class state, but they don't want to destroy the US North American ruling class state. Something that's coming clearer and clearer every day. I hear, the Green Party and all these other forces and all these democratic socialists, they're not talking about a destruction of the US colonialist capitalist state. They're not talking about that. That's what oppression kills us. And so a successful struggle by the US North American working people will also demand the destruction of US North American ruling class state. Black workers who are the heart of the Black liberation movement will unite with North American workers at the point of production and lead the struggle against our common class enemy. Black people under the leadership of these same workers and their fighting party, the African People's Socialist Party, will attack and lay siege upon the US North American capitalist colonial state, which must be smashed to oblivion if either national liberation or socialism is to ever be realized. It is upon this realization that our work in the African People's Socialist Party is guided as we struggle against US imperialism from within its own borders. It is upon this realization that we have developed a strategy for liberation from US imperialism from within. Our strategy for liberation constitutes another of the contributions that our party has made to our defeated revolution in an attempt to rebuild and push forward. It was first put forward in the presentation I made in 1977 at the Black Organizers Conference at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. I'm talking about a strategy, a strategic presentation put forth in 1977. Yeah, a long time ago. But it's the only strategic approach that has been put forth by the African Revolution. It is extraordinary. It is the thing that gives science and professionalism and contributes to the professionalism of a struggle to be free, as opposed to maintaining some kind of whimpering, ongoing relationship to colonial white power. So we say, since that time, the presentation was reprinted in full in the Burning Spear and has also been published by the party in pamphlet form. Stated simply, this is the strategy, calls for one, winning African people in the United States to a position of struggling for political independence. That's my job. That's the job of the revolution. African people have to be won to this position, understanding colonialism and fighting against colonial domination, foreign and alien oppression. Two, establishing the leadership of the pro-independence or anti-colonial movement. That's who has to lead the struggle. We are in a battle against those people who are assimilationists and who are apologists for white power and who will say that Black people have to continue to struggle by book dancing and doing all the other kinds of things to win support and fidelity from the bourgeoisie, to become the talented 10, even if it's a good dancing reggae singing sector of the neo-colonial, of the African movement. Three, winning support for the independence or anti-colonial position within current US borders. That's what we have to do. That we want to have support from all those forces who are honest. And it doesn't matter that all the white people, and maybe most of the white people won't unite with us. It doesn't matter that your white lover or the white forces who you work with don't agree with you. The fact is that we have to win the support from whomever it can be won, because everybody who we win to understand that African people have to be free. We have to be free that there can be no dignity in not being free and to continue to live willingly under colonial oppression. So we want to win that. And so what it does is it exposes all the opponents of our freedom. That line needs to be drawn so that everybody who's opposed to us having independence, opposed to us to be free, and can be clearly identified. Number 4, creating dual or competing or contending governmental power, dual power, creating dual competing power, not just setting up something that while their system is there, but setting up something that is like their system but competes with its existence. That's what the 52 institutions that the party has created throughout the country and is creating throughout the world is for. It's to negate the power and the influence of the colonizer. That's what the 1982 World Tribunal on Reparations was about. To begin to create our own institutions. These are not mock trials. Put the U.S. government on trial. Put the system on trial, and create these contending governmental powers. It's a power of our own. And you say, well, hell, you created, you found the U.S. guilty, et cetera, but you don't have anything to make them. Not yet, we don't. But once you declare them guilty, it tells you what your task is. And now that they have been declared guilty, then the task is to develop the capacity to deliver a consequence to the fact that they have been defined as guilty by our people. Number 5, exposing the oppressive or anti-democratic nature of the United States government. How are you going to expose the anti-democratic nature of the United States government when you're swimming with it, sleeping with it, talking about how somehow the Russians are so horrible because they are doing all these horrible things, and how Biden and this whole crew of slave owners, the ones who put slavery in place, the one who put colonialism in place, the one killing people all around the world, and that includes Black people around the world and right here in the United States. How in the hell are you going to be talking about the anti-democratic nature of the United States government when you're in bed with it, when you're sleeping with it? When that's impossible. That's the help. That's why it's so important to have a strategic objective so that you know what you're fighting for and you know what you're fighting against. 6, winning international support for our independence or anti-colonial position. And 7, building an African People's Liberation Army. And so this is what it is that we are talking about in terms of strategic approach to the liberation of our people. This is one part of what helps to distinguish the African People's Socialist Party, because we are a revolutionary party of practice. We are practical revolutionary. African internationalism is a theory of practice, et cetera. It is a theory with a plan. So I just wanted to say, I'm going to read just a little more, and I'm on page 80, and the first full paragraph. It says, partially due to the second full part, to the APSP's leadership, our movement is now capable of speaking with greater coherence and ideological clarity. Additionally, it has begun to learn to transform ideological conclusions into practical struggles. The party's disciplined leadership in overcoming the problems of general leadership and ideological clarity for our movement began almost at the time of its founding. The first evidence of this leadership on a national and international level was our determination to publish the Burning Spear newspaper and to republish the Burning Spear newspaper in 1973. This decision had the subjective intent and objective result of unifying our movement against through providing practical information and summations of struggles throughout the world, ideological discussions throughout the US, and a general information clearinghouse for the entire movement. And so we did a lot of that. And then if you go to page 81, if you read, and I think people should read all of this, but on the page 81, under the subhead, Party Brings Nationalist Forces Together, says, then in Atlanta on September 4th, 1977, the party organized National Committee to Defend Desert Woods sponsored the first National Revolutionary Nationalist demonstration to occur
in nearly a decade. It was a demonstration occurring in conjunction with one that we did in San Francisco, which saw representatives from virtually every legitimate nationalist force within the United States together in the same demonstration and speaking from the same platform on the case of Desi Woods and virtually every struggle Africans within current US borders are confronted with. It was a turning point in the struggle for unity, leadership of the African nationalist movement by Black people and the struggle against localism. The party's leadership in resurrecting our movement from political and ideological Netherlands was also demonstrated in the July 4th, 1979 March to free Desi Woods in Plains, Georgia, the hometown of US President James Earl Carter, just as in the September 1977 demonstration. The Plains demonstration was national in character with representatives from the entire African independence movement, as well as the North American Solidarity movement. And moreover, an international element was added by a strong showing and participation from the Puerto Rican independence movement. The party's role in struggles around African political prisoners and prisoners of war, the Black Liberation Army, Assata Shakur, Sundiata Acoli, the RNA 11, Geronimo Pratt, Desi Woods, etc. The move to internationalize our movement through close work with the US sector of the Frente Sandinista La Liberación Nacional, the FSLN. The beginning work, that's out of Nicaragua. The beginning work with the revolutionary forces from El Salvador. The recent European tour by National Committee to Defend Desi Woods chairwoman, Demisha Blackard. The growing relationship with the London-based Race Today collective has had an undeniable impact on our movement. So this is part of what I think is really important for us to say, and you can see much more than that, because there were all kinds of things that we were involved in that kept this movement alive. The African People's Social Party did that. We were conscious of the responsibility to do that. We were conscious of developing a strategy. We were consciously of raising up the entire anti-colonial movement as a leadership. We put this forth as a strategic objective. We put forth all of these other entities. We did all kinds of things to create united actions and united formations to make this happen. Then I want to go just to page 85. It says, stronger the movement, stronger the attack. However, the political and ideological leadership the party was providing for our movement did not automatically mean that the various forces constituting the anti-colonial movement would have unity with our party. In fact, the stronger this movement became, that we were consciously helping to rebuild, the more sectors of it began to attack the party. This was essentially because of the unsettled ideological accounts left over in our movement from the 60s, accounts that the military defeat of the US government prevented us from settling through serious ideological debate and political struggle. The fundamental question that separated the party from other sectors of the anti-colonial movement and sparked the growing opposition to the leadership of the party was the question of class. Since the movement had opened up our revolutionary offensive during the 60s around the question of foreign domination, there was for a while general unity within the movement. However, this unity had actually begun to fracture before our defeat, particularly with the rise of the Black Panther Party that interjected the question of class within the anti-colonialist tendency. The African People's Socialist Party's leadership in rebuilding our anti-colonial movement represented the conscious leadership of the advanced detachment of the African working class that had accepted and does accept our responsibility for leading not only the entire class, but also for almost the entire people. So although all anti-colonial forces, regardless of class, interest, and outlook, were capable of benefiting from the party's leadership in rebuilding our movement, most could not accept the leadership of the African working class and the implications such leadership holds for the kind of society we must build. The growing opposition to the party's leadership by a sector within our movement escalated along with the escalation of the political and ideological aggression by US imperialism against the leadership of the national liberation movements around the world, and especially its class-conscious component internationally. For example, within a very concentrated period of time that sharply challenged the parasitic structure of the world economy and deeply influenced the domestic politics of the United States. Revolutionary victories of sorts occurred in Vietnam, Angola, Mozambique, Iran, Grenada, Nicaragua, and Zimbabwe. The Carter and Reagan regimes of the United States represented the imperialist responses to these victories and the unfolding revolutionary movements around the world. The virulence of US imperialism was especially obvious in the stance of the Reagan regime, which in defense of world capitalism under US imperialist leadership unleashed an undisguised white nationalist ideological and political attack on the peoples of the world. And this is true despite the fact that this guy, Barack Hussein Obama, held up Reagan as one of these wonderful people in order to win and galvanize all kinds of support from other sectors of the colonizer population. During the same time, sectors of the radical petty bourgeoisie within our anti-colonial movement escalated their attacks on the party, and thus the leadership of the African working class. These attacks included efforts to disrupt the revolutionary working class-led African National Prison Organization being built by the party. Petty bourgeois forces also attacked by creating competing organizations with functions already represented in party-built African working class-led organizations. One such party-led organization was the African National Reparations Organization, that finally and for the first time in history put the question of reparations to African people on a popular agenda for our struggle. In other words, all the forces, regardless of nationality, even sectors of colonial or subject peoples that have an interest in preserving the world-class system, moved to defend the class system. This happened as the parasitic capitalist system was being shaken by the people's struggles, which challenged the structure of the world economy by efforts to extricate themselves from imperialist domination. This defense of imperialism also occurred inside our party. And so the basic point is that there were various forces who did the whole anti-colonial movement, the whole African population benefited from the struggles that the party had led against colonialism, ideologically, politically, organizationally. They benefited from it, but they had different class interests, many of them, and then coming out of this place where they were before we had consolidated this kind of anti-colonial leadership, they began to attack the African working class in the form of the African People's Socialist Party. And so I'm hoping that people can take a look at all of this. And I just wanted to say that they talk about the Congress of our party. And as I said, this document that we're reading from is from the Third Congress of the African People's Socialist Party. And the last three paragraphs read thusly. The Congress is the fundamental institution of the party, which allows the party's membership to take possession of the party's line and to participate in establishing party policies. And I want to say this because the party has come under all kinds of attacks at different times. There's some mentioned right here in this document. But the party has this Congress, and the membership takes possession of the party during the time of this Congress. And the membership establishes the policies, and the membership passes the resolutions. And the membership is the entity that votes on the direction of the party. And in addition to the democratic implications of such participation in the Congress, it also increases the level of political education in the party's membership and gives each member of the party a political stake and the political and ideological clarity to defend the revolutionary line and policies of our party. In fact, it is precisely because the second attack on the party occurred at our Congress that the party was easily mobilized and the alien line of our hidden defector was totally rejected, leading to him to furtively quit the party and leave town. These attacks on the party did not go unmet. A part of our legacy is the extent to which we have waged theoretical and line struggles both within and without our movement in our efforts to advance the revolution. These struggles have been a part of the development of our party, as can be seen in the development of the theory quoted here from lower to higher levels representing the different periods representing the different periods discussed. Uhuru, I know I went much longer, Comrade Director, than we planned, but I hope we survived it. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, I think so. I think we are still here. And I just want to say that, well, one, just really salute this whole presentation and the readings from Izweretui Africa. I want to just express how, you know, this analysis, one, just shows the irrefutable leadership of the party and advancing the African Revolution after all this time, and also that there is nothing abstract about what you're saying. And I know that some people would like to keep it abstract because it means they can't solve the problem. But this analysis, understanding colonialism as a mode of production, you know, makes everything clear, and it gives the struggle the to what end. It says what it is that our responsibility is, and it means that we can't prolong the future, that we're taking responsibility for it right now. So I just really want to salute your leadership, this groundbreaking development in the African liberation movement. And yeah, so we are over time, but I do want to go ahead and just give a couple of announcements. And I don't know, depending on how we feel, Chairman, if you want to at least take one question. I think there were two really good questions that I would like to take. So let's get through these announcements really quickly and then take some of those questions. And the first one, I believe, is actually a video to show how you can get in contact to volunteer with the Public Relations Office of Chairman Omali Yeshitela. So if you have any of those skills listed there and you are interested in working for the public relations of Chairman Omali Yeshitela, go ahead and email volunteer@omaliyeshitela.org. So to take a look at some of the other announcements happening within our movement, just want to say first and foremost, Uhuru Furniture in Philadelphia was nominated for Best Home Furnishing Store on the PHL 17, which is a Philly TV station with on Top Spot's viewers poll. The store has won it for the last 2 years. Uhuru Furniture, an African economic self-determination institution of the African People's Education and Defense Fund, deserves to win it again. So vote for Uhuru Furnitures. Everyone can vote once a day, every day through May 16th at tinyurl.com/PHL17 Uhuru Furniture, tinyurl.com/PHL17 Uhuru Furniture. For Give St. Louis Day on Thursday, May 5th, support the Uhuru Wakulea African Women's Health Center and Doula Project. The Black community of St. Louis suffers an infant mortality rate 3.3 times that of white people. The Black Power Blueprint is changing that reality by addressing the interests and aspirations of African people for control over our own lives and communities. Donate now through May 5th at givestlday.org/Black Power Blueprint, and attend the live webinar on Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central. Register at tinyurl.com/GiveSTLDay Health Center. Come to the Black Mothers March on the White House this coming weekend with events on Saturday, May 7th and the march on Sunday, May 8th in Washington, D.C., deepening the resistance to the terror of child protection services and calling for Black community control of child protection. The event is organized by a coalition of Black-led organizations, including the African National Women's Organization, that have been involved in the struggle to rescue our children from the custody of the state. For more information and to register, visit blackmothersmarch.com. Mark your calendars for African Liberation Day 2022, taking place May 28th to 29th and featuring festivals and conferences in cities across the world. This year's African Liberation Day events will recognize the founding of the African People's Socialist Party on African Liberation Day in 1972. Learn more about your region's ALD events at alduhuru.org. And make sure you like and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday Study at our new showtime, 10 a.m. Eastern, and support the Omali Taught Me show by donating now at paypal.me/OmaliTaughtMe. And to wrap up these announcements, I just want to put out a call for those who are tuning in, who united with the analysis provided. And if for any of future events, go to theburningspear.com/events. We have more listed there. But again, just want to put out a call for people to join the African People's Socialist Party, no matter where it is that you're watching from, all throughout the world. We have viewers, right now logged on, in various parts of the world, and you can be a part of the African People's Socialist Party, making the African Revolution, building your front of the African Revolution. So join the party, visit APSP.uhuru.org. We have to make the African Revolution. You have to be a part of this. So APSP.uhuru.org. So Chairman, let's go to two of our questions that came in that I think will, really be important for you to address. This first one comes from Comrade Jamal in Moorhead, Minnesota. And he says, Uhuru, Comrade Chairman, thank you for this enlightening review of the struggle of social/class forces within the African nation and from without waged by left colonizers. Is the ideological influence of the colonizer nation broadly and the white left evident in the reactionary stance against unified socialist African internationalist-led state power that Black, quote unquote, anarchists put forth? How could we best clarify the need for not just Black power, but Black state power to the African working class masses?
Oh, thank you, Comrade Jamal. In fact, the both sides of that question speak to the same issue, and that's the issue of the state. The state is an oppressive institution. It has always been an oppressive institution. It's an institution of coercion. It comes into existence at a time in Europe when there were societies were split between haves and have-nots, and those who had everything got it as a consequence of taking it from those who don't. The only way that you can have this kind of split in society is that if you have armed forces, if you have police, if you have the ability to coerce, to oppress people, and so that's the basis for most anarchists having come to the conclusion that they have to fight against the state. Doesn't matter to them what state it is, they just got to fight against the state. It's a blind kind of understanding. And it's also an understanding that was born from a European experience and not from the relationship that African people have with colonialism. And the fact is that the whole bourgeois state has its origin in colonialism, colonial domination of African people. The state has to be crushed. But the thing is that the way African people fight for democracy is to destroy the colonial capitalist state that dominates and controls us, keeps us in bondage, does all the horrible things that we know about that happens to us. So that state has to be destroyed. But what has to happen, we have to destroy that state. And just because you attack that state doesn't mean that, okay, now we're free and that we can simply go fishing. The fact is that the colonizer, the oppressor, becomes even more vicious once it even loses power. The colonized have to have our own power in order to crush any of the attempts for the colonizers to come back to power. We have to have our own power to reshape the kind of society that we want to have, because there are traditions that goes back a few hundred years of how colonial capitalist traditions, how people treat each other, how people act in these relationships that are reinforced. They call them relations of production. That's reinforced in the society. So the fact is that those of us who are colonized under the leadership of the African working class, under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party, having achieved state power, we also have the responsibility to do everything possible to make sure, one, that the colonizer does not come back to power anymore. And the thing is that what makes the Black anarchists reactionary is the fact that what they're doing is struggling against the idea or against the initiation of an anti-colonial state that has come into existence under the leadership of the revolutionary African working class.
So we have to make sure once we take power that we can reshape the society that we're talking about so that it doesn't have the same kinds of attitudes and institutions that have been created under colonial domination, and that the colonizers cannot come back to power. Uhuru. There was another one.
Yes, Uhuru, Chairman. Thank you, Comrade Jamal, for your question. And this last question is coming from IMCO on Facebook. And they asked, I'm curious if you would like to, and we've already spoken to this just by talking about the history of the party, but I'm curious if you would like to share any thoughts on the unity of the indigenous of the Western Hemisphere and Africans on the continent of so-called North America.
Well, the fact is that the African People's Socialist Party, we understand that we are Africans, and Africa is our national homeland, and that we have to fight and unify and liberate and unify Africa. But we're also part of the revolution of what is now characterized as the Americas, that we engage in a single struggle, and that we don't want to fall prey to this new Africanist kind of idea that we somehow fighting for our central struggle is fighting for the land here in North America, that which inadvertently, whatever our intentions, find us uniting with the war that's been waged against indigenous people here for centuries, that took their land and makes this a critical aspect of the struggle of the oppression that they suffer from. So we unite with the indigenous people here, in every possible way, and we have done this in practical terms. I have actually, been in situations of resistance, that serious resistance. I'm not just talking about going to, like a simple demonstration where we graciously, ask the indigenous people to come out and play tom-toms. But I mean, in serious struggle in Big Mountain in Arizona, where we were waiting for an assault by the federal government to take the land from the Diné or Navajo people because they had discovered uranium on that territory, and people were armed and prepared to fight. So we believe that it's a very serious struggle, and we are part of that revolutionary movement, and we will be partners in the struggle for the liberation of the indigenous people as part of the struggle for African liberation as well. So I hope that was an adequate response in a short period of time to the question that was just raised. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, Uhuru Imko, thank you so much. And to close on that question, Comrade Sitalmina commented, the messages of Chairman Omali Yeshitela is a guide to the liberation of all peoples of the world. It is what we as Mexicanos, Chicanos, Latinos within the occupied territories must do today. So
who is this from?
Sitalmina, Maria Q. Ortiz.
Uhuru.
Uhuru.
Yeah. And did we respond to Jamal adequately? Do you know?
Yes, he said, Uhuru, Comrade Chairman, thank you.
Uhuru, good.
All right, Uhuru. So that's going to do it for questions today. I do want to go ahead and lead us into the closing remarks. I want to bring back up Comrade Secretary General Luwezi Kinshasa to just also offer a few closing remarks. We heard from him earlier today, giving that powerful overview. So Comrade SG Luwezi, can you give us a few closing remarks, and then Chairman, we'll end it with you. Oh, let me get your camera on.
Yeah, so it always takes a few seconds before everything works perfectly. Yeah, I just want to take this opportunity to once again thank you, Director Akile, for the brilliant work you're doing to provide the war of ideas, the war of African working class against the war made to us by the colonizers. And I want also to once again recognize the leadership of Chairman Omali Yeshitela, taking us to this period, critical period. Everyone can see we are not last year or the year before, we just came out. I can't even say we came out from COVID-19 to the explosion everyone can see in Ukraine. So you can see an acceleration of crisis. It's obvious to most people, but the critical question is what the Africans are doing. That's the critical questions. And some of the questions that were asked just now, the question of power was raised. And it's a critical factor. We know the Chinese, for example, and the Russians, they're asking for a multipolar world. But the critical question is what we Africans are demanding, what we want. We want a world free from colonialism as the global model of production. That's the demand of the African nation, of the African working class. And for that to happen, we must capture power. We must achieve state power. And we cannot do that short of a revolution. And we cannot do that if we don't have the African People's Socialist Party on the ground everywhere. That's really is the critical question. What do we have on the ground? I know there are a whole bunch of forces, but the most critical force is the force that leads us to the revolution, and that's our party. And that is the most critical thing. So the studies we did today and the practical aspect of it is for everyone who is not a member yet is to join. That's the practical aspect. You've been in studies, and after listening to all these things that made things clear to you, but how do we move next? You heard about the struggle against opportunism. The chairman commented, led the discussion around it throughout the document. And for us to go to the next phase, to make sure we defeat opportunism, and also to win the war to make African People's Socialist Party the leading force everywhere. That's how you know opportunism will be defeated at every corner, at every struggle. If you have the party on the ground, we can make mistakes, but the existence of the party is a guarantee. That opportunism will never prevail. That is the significance of building the African People's Socialist Party. So once again, I just feel privileged to be in this period, critical period, and to be working on the leadership of Chairman of Yeshitela and being the party and fighting this struggle to recapture and to basically complete the struggle of the 6 years as chairman of often said. So it's just a great pleasure and privilege to be here.
Uhuru. Thank you, Comrade Secretary General. Thank you, Comrade Director Akile, and all of you for coming in to this discussion today. I know we've gone a little over time, and I am self-critical for that. I promise to try to prevent that from happening again. But I do think it is extremely important for all of us to recognize that this is a serious moment that we exist in, that we live in, that we struggle in. It's a moment of extraordinary opportunity if we will be bold enough, have the courage to take advantage of it. It's a moment of peril and of promise, and we can win now. And what we are looking at is this crisis of a social system that was born of colonialism. And it's really important for us to understand that we're looking at a colonial mode of production where all the activity, all of the production, all of the social and institutional life that we see is something that has its foundation in colonialism, a colonial mode of production. It must be destroyed. And that even the explanations that we see people giving for activities that they're involved in is based on this superstructure born of a colonial mode of production. And this whole notion that somehow Russia has suddenly become the main enemy of the people, or that we can equate what is happening between Russia and the United States, that somehow they got two bad guys or two bad entities, Russia and the United States, and that we can't pick sides, we can criticize both. That kind of thing is just a cowardly refusal by opportunists to recognize that the United States is the enemy. And this is not even a statement about a position on what kind of society Russia has right now. It is recognition that from its very inception, from the very emergence of Russia into modernity, it has been under attack by the colonial forces of the world. And that is precisely because the inception of Russia coming into modernity happened at the very same time of anti-colonial struggles around the world, challenging the colonial mode of production. And Russia was just one of them. So Russian Revolution was just one expression of this attack on the colonial mode of production. And Russia succeeded where the Garvey movement did not succeed. Russia succeeded where we did not succeed at the moment in Nicaragua.
and various other places where this anti-colonial revolutionary movement was going on, where the crisis of this whole social system was exploding around the world, where opportunism abounded, where everybody with a stake in the existing social system found their places to support it, whether that was Du Bois or whether that was any others who characterized themselves as communists and socialists inside the United States and who found themselves on the side of the United States. And so what we're looking at are forces who in the United States, sometimes they're Africans, sometimes they call themselves part of the Black liberation movement or the Black left. Sometimes they are white colonizers who call themselves white leftists or white communists or Green Party, this or that. They refuse to say that they can unite with the struggle that Russia has been waging against the colonial mode of production now for 106 years, 105 years or so. And they refuse to say that the best way to deal with this contradiction that exists is to support the anti-colonial movement that did not succeed, that was crushed. During the same time, the United States ganged up with other colonial powers to attack Russia in 1918. So the way forward is to unite with the anti-colonial revolution under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party and other people. The way forward is to demand of the people in Ukraine that they turn against the colonial capitalists who are now leading them into this slaughterhouse to attack Russia and to under the leadership of this opportunist reactionary sector there, that they should turn their guns on the enemy, where you've got U.S. forces on the ground fighting in Ukraine and British and other forces there. The way forward is to join with the struggle against colonial mode of production, and we're leading that. And so I just wanted to thank everybody for being here. Join the African People's Socialist Party. This is our time now. We can win. Now we are winning. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, thank you so much. Thank you, Secretary General Luwezi and comrades. This has been yet another profound discussion. I want to thank our guests and salute the leadership of the chairman. Make sure to follow the chairman on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday Study. Build the African Revolution, Vanguard up. Uhuru.
Uhuru. Vanguard up, Israel too.